Okay, and 1, 2, 3.
Jesus wouldn't think much of television in America. One, the religion that's on television totally distorts his truth. Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 18, Luke 4, 5 and 6 and 7. He would be appalled and brokenhearted, and is, at the culture that we have in America. It is full of violence and hatred and an abuse of the moral laws of God. And Jesus would say the same thing he said when people who wanted to learn from him went up and sat down on at his feet on the mountain. He'd say the same thing. We are an arrogant people. We don't, full of pride, and we want to dominate the world. We don't want to care for the world. And he would also let us know that fear is not the will of God. And but you know, these harsh human emotions, hatred, anger, and fear, are what he taught needed to be controlled by Christian meekness. And we do everything we can on television to make people afraid, so that they will support the theory of redemptive violence. You can solve your problems with killing people. And of course, he would immediately point that out at all of the brokenness in our own.
Another evidence here. This is pretty good. You were saying, and he would point out the brokenness.
Yeah, that he would probably talk about David and David's adultery and murder, and what Nathan told David about the little ewe lamb, and that God's judgment was on David because of his sin about those things. You can't kill and slaughter and rape the earth like our culture has done and is doing, and is justifying by our media that we need to do these things, that it's right to do these things, we're special, and not expect to have the culture break down in violence and hurt and disintegration, as it did to David's household. And so, but he would not leave it that hopeless, that's for sure, because he would teach us to be loving and kind, merciful, accepting of all people, and teach us to overcome evil with good instead of responding and retaliating. You know, he taught us that you can't even, you know, if you raise your right hand to kill somebody, you're better off to cut off your right hand. And he would be working on us immensely to disarm, to quit using violence to destroy the world and the world's peoples, to start working with people to create a community on this earth for everybody. So he would be very, I mean, I can't imagine almost every show you watch is built on the supposition that people feed on and off of lust and violence and hatred, to build fear in the lives of people. So folks are all locked up. Everybody in America is locked up, got a gun, and kill one another because of that fear. So he'd teach us, don't be afraid. He'd say this, don't be afraid. How many times he said, don't be afraid? Every time he showed up, that's what he said, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, love your neighbor. Just love your neighbor. And of course, he lived in the same oppressive, violent culture that we're living in. The Roman Empire, built on the same kind of domination and violence for the privilege and the few at the expense of the poor. And so he would work for human dignity for everybody, not just somebody's, but everybody. And what a wonderful gift that is. And he would teach us biblical anthropology. You know, anybody that's born of the universe is somebody to be respected and loved and to be cared for and to be nurtured to be born to what they were created to be. Yes.
Oh man, that is beautiful.
I have something I'd like you to do. In the discussion sometimes of people saying, you know, what's going on at your church and all that kind of stuff. I was talking with somebody one day and I used the term redemptive violence, and she was like, what is that? We use that a lot. Would you maybe just expound a little bit on what you mean by redemptive violence for those that aren't as familiar with the term as we are?
All right, you know, redemptive violence is about that hope comes out of the end of a gun. If I can control or resist evil with violence, then we can live. And so you have to define who's in and who's out. And the ones that are out, it's okay to kill them because that's necessary to create community. And of course, that's Klan theology. That's Christian terrorism that comes out of the Christian tradition. It's awful. And so you don't, Jesus said the greatest power in the world is love. And love transforms all human beings, even the most maligned. And so if you think you've got to have this sheriff with a gun who can kill every bad guy that shows up in order to have a meaningful community, then you have to have that kind of violence to do that. And I know people always go back to World War II and Hitler and the necessity of the violence to destroy Hitler. But Hitler was a product of people accepting violence and not standing against it when it was in its inception. And we accepting violence today and the necessity of violence. And I was talking to my neighbor yesterday. He came over and wanted to know how Nancy was doing. And he told me about his friend from McCullough that got shot down in Orange Beach this week. And that his friend was a hothead, and somebody cut him off, and he got real mad, and they got in a fight on the road, and he stopped him, and at a stoplight got out of the car and yelling at the guy, and the guy pulled out a gun and shot him. And those are the escalations of death. And Jesus would invite us to the wilderness to be tempted again and to overcome the temptations. Because if you rule the world, the only way you can do it is with violence and death and the fear of death. But that's not God's way. God's way is overcoming fear, honor and respect and dignity. And of course, these are the things that the black folks here in Birmingham taught me. And I'm so grateful for that. Fred Shuttlesworth, Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, 1956. Human rights. Battling for the dignity and worth of every single human being. And Martin King always talked about the dignity and worth of human personality. And when we see that, we might have to restrain somebody till they wake up, but we ain't gonna kill them.
That's a closing sentence right there.
That's good. That's good. Are you satisfied?
I am, if you are. You know, we didn't, I think we have approached all the questions one way or another.